Hey everyone, Rob Van Dyson here, once again up at Hobble Creek. I'm recording this a little bit later today. It is actually right around 1700 or 5 p.m. Mountain Time. And this morning I actually ended up spending some time with my family. Slept in a little and spent some time with my family. And just a little side tangent just as we're getting started. I know I talk a lot about, figuring out what your dreams are and pursuing them. And obviously that's going to take time. But it's also really important to take time and spend it with your family. And it's one of the things that I can forget very easily. In the 5 Love Languages, that particular book, in that particular series, they talk a lot about how everyone has different love languages and that certain love languages are more important to an individual than others. And time really isn't high on my list, but it's very high on my wife's list. And I think it's rather prevalent in my daughter's list. And I'm sitting here and I'm trying to do all these other things, and it's very easy for me to forget about time. My need for quality time gets met really, really quick. And so it can be hard when my wife is going, well, we haven't spent any time together. And I'm looking at it going, we spent all this time together. And she's like, no, that's not quality time. That doesn't count. And so I'm actually trying to make an effort to spend more quality time with my family. So I'm recording this a little bit later. Anyways, if you haven't read those books, I recommend them. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the main book into the show notes down below. But that's why I'm recording late. Anyways, I was listening to this podcast, and I don't always listen to podcasts right as they come out. This one was actually from a little bit ago. And it's from the Survival Podcast. And I'm going to do something a little different. I'll usually reference podcasts. I'll put links in the show notes. But I don't often say, you really need to listen to this one. This time I am. This time I'm going to say, listen to this particular podcast. And it's, once again, the Survival Podcast, episode 2719. It's entitled 20 Skills and Actions You Really Need for the Coming Future. And one of the things, not everyone's going to agree with everything he put on the list, and that's fine. Hopefully that means you're actually thinking and not just going with biases, but as you listen to it, there's probably going to be things you disagree with. I don't agree with everything Jack says. And if you listen to him long enough, you'll actually hear him say things of, if you agree with everything I say, you're wrong. You are not thinking critically. So what I would encourage you to do is to listen to this podcast. Once again, link in the show notes. And listen to it critically. Listen to it and think about it. And it's like, okay, I don't agree with this particular thing that he said, this particular skill or action that he states. Going back to the last episode, why? Why don't you agree with it? I don't agree with it because A. Is A valid? Well, for me, A is valid. A matches up with my particular belief system. It matches up with my values. So, it is valid. If it's not, well, re-examine that value. But I believe that there is so much good in this podcast that, I believe you will find things. And I encourage you not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are people who I disagree with, who I think 90% of what they say is bunk, complete and utter bunk. Well, that means the remaining 10%, actually might have some validity to it. And I can look at that additional 10% and say, I agree with that. Or, I think he has a point. And so when he says something that you disagree with and you examine it and go, okay, I see where he's coming. I don't think he's right, but he does have some points here. What can I do to cause those two things where I can take the parts that I do agree with, that I do value, um, and work them into the part you don't agree with, and say, okay, for instance, it talks about homeschooling in this one here. And, a lot of people are resistant to homeschooling for a variety of reasons. But if you actually go and research his view on homeschooling, he doesn't get deep into this because he's actually done several episodes recently about homeschooling. But if you were to go back and listen to those episodes and say, okay, I now understand why he believes this. It's still not enough for me to change my opinion on whether or not I should be homeschooling. But he does bring up some good concerns. How can I address those concerns while still going with the method of education for my children that I agree with? So, on that, as a side note, one of the things that he brought up in that really struck home, one of the things that I am really going to try and work into my life, is to learn 2 new things a day. They could be, about anything. It could be about something you're already passionate about. I'm a blacksmith. I'm passionate about blacksmithing. I can learn something new about blacksmithing that I didn't know before. Or it could be just something completely random. But make an effort to learn 2 new things a day. And I actually kind of broke down the math. He did too, but he used kind of round numbers. And so these are the exact numbers. There's 365 days in a year, the last time I checked. Yes, there are leap years. If you want, you can break down the math on that particular one. But for the most part, 365 days. If you learn 2 new things every day, at the end of a year, so if you start this today, by August 30th, 2021, you will have learned 730 new things. At the end of 5 years, you'll have learned 3,650 new things. At the end of 5 years. And at the end of 10 years, you're looking at 7,300 new things. Now, some of these things, you learn them, they're like, okay, yeah, that's cool. But all knowledge is commutative. And what I mean by that, if you think back to very basic math, where you have things like addition is commutative. 2 plus 3 is the same as 3 plus 2. Multiplication is commutative. 2 times 3 is the same as 3 times 2. And what I mean by all knowledge is commutative is you could learn something about subject A. And there are things that you now know about subject A that when you look at subject B, at face value, they seem completely unrelated. But there are certain truths, there are certain knowledges, there are certain factors that apply to A that apply to B. And so you learn 2 new things about subject A that's going to help you make decisions about this subject B. And it's going to help you make them faster. So better decisions, faster. I think we can all agree that's usually a good thing. So that's something I am definitely going to be working on, and that's something I highly encourage all of you to do, especially as we get into more and more complex things. Like I said, my passion is blacksmithing. I want to get it where I am making money with metalwork. Both blacksmithing, welding, fabrication, casting, all of those things. I didn't name my business Iron Found Forge or Iron Found Blacksmithing. I named it Iron Found Metalwork because I want to be able to go into all of those. Well, skills I learned blacksmithing are going to apply to the others, and skills I learned welding will apply to blacksmithing and the others, so on and so forth. So once again, listen to this podcast and do that. And going back to my point I was just trying to make that I kind of got sidetracked by myself on, yes, I do that a lot, is, okay, so I've learned quite a bit about blacksmithing. I have a ton still to learn. But yesterday, I went down to a local park, Evermore, and sold items with my mentor, Matt. As I am doing that, I'm having to learn other skills that apply. Things like marketing, things like sales. And, you know, I've known a little bit about sales, but I'm having to learn more. Right now, I'm working with Matt and his business, which is something I think I'm going to continue to do, at least for a while. As long as it makes sense. I like the guy. I trust the guy. But he's had to go and get his business license. Well, working with him and talking with him, I've learned a little bit about that. I've learned about, well, why would you go with an LLC over like an S Corp or a C Corp and that kind of stuff. I've learned, all these skills that you have to learn. There are skills I learned from running the booth for Clan Mackay here in Utah. And about setting up a booth, about talking to people, keeping their interest. And those skills directly have transferred into some of the stuff I'm going to have to do when I'm at an event, direct selling. Or hand selling, as I refer to it. And just by keeping that kind of stuff up, the more I learn, the better I am. So, I think I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Right now, we're at about 12 minutes. Just, if you like this video series, if you find value in it, please feel free to share it. Like, subscribe, that standard triad. There's actually a reason why just about every single YouTuber says it. That is how you build your base. That is how the algorithms work. On a side note, I am no longer on Facebook. My account is still there, but I don't have it installed. I'm not checking it on my computer, all that kind of stuff. I've moved over to Gab, G-A-B Social. And I am also on Parler, P-A-L-E-R. Apparently some people pronounce it Parler, but my understanding is that Parler is spelled completely different. But anyway, I'm primarily on those two social medias. I'll also be uploading my videos here pretty soon to Library, LRBY, and just so I have redundancy in my social media, and so I'm not losing content just because someone decided they didn't like me or what I'm saying. I don't think what I'm saying is extremely controversial, but in these days people seem to be able to be offended by saying the sky is blue. So, once again, I encourage you to figure out what your dreams are, to work on your dreams. If necessary, adjust fire. If you try something and you think it's your dream and say, you know what, this really isn't my dream, fine. Figure out what is, or at least something else you think is, and work towards that. And it's not going to be wasted effort because, once again, all knowledge is communicative. Alright, Fin Dyson out.